The light over Jeju Island was wrong. Park Min-seo leaned closer to her monitor in the darkened control room. She had been reviewing data from the new gravitational lensing array for 3 hours, and her coffee was cold. The array was sensitive. It could detect the subtle bend of starlight caused by mass. A satellite, a dense cloud, even a flock of birds could register as a tiny, temporary blip. This was not a blip. It was a smooth, curved anomaly that had appeared at 3:14 a.m. local time over the island's quiet central forests. It held for 47 seconds. It showed a mass equivalent to a small building, but there was no building there. No aircraft signature. No weather phenomenon. It was as if a heavy, invisible stone had been dropped into the pond of spacetime, and she was seeing the ripples. Min-seo saved the data. She ran a diagnostic. The system was clean. A strange chill, one that had nothing to do with the room's air conditioning, touched the back of her neck. She marked the file for the morning team. An anomaly. Unexplained. One to watch. Lee Soo-jin preferred the world through a lens. It framed things. It gave chaos a border. Her camera was a heavy, comfortable weight in her hands as she crouched by a stream in those same central forests. The early morning sun filtered through the leaves. Her target was a pair of otters, sleek and playful, tumbling in the water. She was very still. It was a skill she had learned long before picking up a camera. As a girl, she would stand frozen at the archery line, her world shrinking to the target 70 meters away. The noise of the crowd, her own heartbeat, everything faded until there was only the pull of the string, the flight of the arrow, the silent thud of a perfect hit. She followed the otters, her camera clicking softly. They were beautiful. For a moment, she was just a woman taking a picture. Then it came. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. Pressure. The fine hairs on her arms stood up. A deep, instinctive alarm bell rang in a part of her brain much older than language. She slowly lowered her camera. She was being watched. Not by the otters. Not by a bird in a tree. This was different. This was a vast, patient, and utterly foreign attention. It felt like the entire sky had leaned down to look at her. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound. A hard, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She did not move. She turned her head, just her eyes at first, scanning the green canopy, the clear blue sky. Nothing. But the feeling did not go away. It intensified. It was a physical weight on her skin. Her body was reacting on its own. Her breathing shallowed. Her muscles coiled, tight and ready, though she did not know for what. And her vision changed. The world did not blur. Instead, it became painfully sharp. Every leaf on every tree seemed individually defined. She could see the grain of the bark on a pine tree 10 meters away. She could count the ripples in the stream water. The sounds of the forest, the rustle of the wind, the chirp of insects, the water's flow, separated into distinct, clear layers in her ears. It was her old focus, the archer's focus. But it was happening without her command, triggered by a presence she could not see. Very slowly, against every screaming instinct that told her to run, she lifted her gaze to the empty patch of sky above the otter stream. She stared. She did not blink. And for just a second, the air shimmered. Not like heat haze. It was a colder, grayer shimmer, like looking through old glass. A shape seemed to be inside it, but it had no edges her eyes could hold on to. It was just a sense of something there, observing. Then it was gone. The pressure vanished. The sharpness faded from her senses, leaving her feeling drained and strangely hollow. The forest sounds rushed back in a normal wave. An otter barked, and she jumped, the sound shockingly loud. Soo-jin stood up on shaky legs. She looked at her hands. They were steady. She took a deep, ragged breath. She lifted her camera and, without thinking, pointed it at the spot in the sky. She took several rapid pictures, knowing it was pointless, a gesture to calm her nerves. That night, in the quiet of her small house, she downloaded the day's photos. The otter pictures were beautiful. She scrolled past them, her stomach tight. She reached the last few shots, the ones of the empty sky. The first showed nothing but blue and clouds. The second was the same. The third, she leaned in. In the upper corner, above the trees, the image was not clean. It was distorted like a flaw in the camera sensor. But the flaw had a pattern. It was a series of concentric ripples, bending the light of a small cloud behind it. It looked exactly like a stone dropped into water, frozen in a photograph. She zoomed in. The center of the ripples was dark, empty. Her own reflection was a faint ghost on the black surface of her computer monitor. In it, her eyes were wide, dark holes. Her pupils were enormous, swallowing the brown of her irises. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something they could not understand. She did not look afraid. In the reflection, she looked intensely, terribly focused. She stared at her own dilated pupils for a long time, as the silence of the house pressed in around her, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The watcher was gone, but the feeling of being seen remained. And something else, something old and cold, was now awake. The world had a new mystery, but only for a few people who looked at the right screens. Park Minnesio's anomaly was not alone. Similar gravitational ripples were spotted by other stations. A flicker over the North Atlantic. A 30-second distortion above the Australian outback. The pattern was random. The events were silent and left no physical trace. A team of scientists, Minnesio among them, started a dedicated watch. They called the phenomenon atmospheric ghosts. The name made it sound harmless. Kim Ji-hun heard about it on a science podcast he listened to while driving. He was a geological surveyor, a man used to the solid reality of rock and soil. The idea of invisible things bending gravity made him smile. It was a good story. He was on his way to see his friend, Sujin. They had been friends since university. Where he was loud and liked people, she was quiet and liked to be alone. He made sure she remembered to live in the human world sometimes. He found her on the porch of her small house, cleaning a camera lens. She smiled when she saw his truck, but it was a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, handing her a bag of warm pastries. "Bad dreams," she said, which was a lie. She hadn't dreamed. She had lain awake listening. He told her about the podcast about the atmospheric ghosts. He made a woo-woo sound and wiggled his fingers. He expected her to give a small, polite laugh. Sujin went very still. The lens cloth stopped moving in her hand. "Where?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "Huh? Oh, all over. One was right here," they said. "Over the island last week. Pretty cool, right?" She looked past him, into the dense green of the forest behind her house. Her eyes were doing that thing he had noticed lately. They weren't just looking. They were tracking, scanning, like she was following the flight of a bird he could never see. "Right here," she repeated softly. He stayed for lunch. She was jumpy. A sudden noise from the kitchen, a pot settling in the cupboard, made her shoulders tense. Her head snapped towards the sound faster than he thought possible. When they talked, her gaze kept drifting to the windows. "Sujin," he said finally, putting down his cup. "What's wrong? Really?" She hesitated. She wanted to tell him it was nothing, but Ji-hun was her only tether. "I feel watched," she said, the words feeling stupid as she said them. He didn't laugh. He leaned forward. "By who?" "Not who." She looked at her hands. "I was by the stream. The air changed. Something was there, looking, and my body reacted, not with fear, with focus, like it used to before a shot." He knew about her archery past. The way she described it sounded like a panic attack to him, but he didn't say that. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested. "Fresh air. Show me the stream." She agreed reluctantly. The forest path was calm and beautiful. Ji-hun talked about his work, about a funny thing his mother had said. Sujin walked beside him, quieter than usual. She kept glancing upwards, through the gaps in the canopy. They reached a wider clearing where the sunlight poured down. It was warm and peaceful. Ji-hun was about to comment on the pretty light. Sujin stopped dead. Her hand shot out, fingers gripping his forearm so tight it hurt. Her entire body was rigid. "Don't move," she breathed. Her voice was a low hum, devoid of all emotion. He followed her line of sight. Across the clearing, the air was shimmering. It was like looking at a mirage on hot asphalt, but the day was cool. The shimmer was a vertical, wobbly patch about the size of a door. The light behind it twisted. Ji-hun's mouth went dry. This was no weather phenomenon. This was a thing. Presence. The scientific curiosity he felt listening to the podcast evaporated, replaced by a primal unease. Sujin's grip on his arm was iron. He could feel a fine tremor running through her, but it wasn't from fear. It was from tension, like a drawn bowstring. Her face was a mask of concentration. Her eyes were fixed on the shimmering air, wide and unblinking. Her pupils were so large and dark they seemed to swallow the light. Then, for a single, breathless heartbeat, the shimmer cleared. Something stood in the clearing. It was tall and slender, made of what looked like overlapping segments of smoky glass or crystal. It had several thin, jointed limbs that didn't seem to follow a human pattern. At the top was a smooth, oval shape with no visible eyes or mouth. It was utterly still. Ji-hun saw an alien. His mind stuttered, trying to process the impossible geometry, the quiet wrongness of it. Sujin saw something else. Her hunter's focus, now fully awake, sliced through the shock. She didn't see a monster. She saw a form. She saw where the central limbs connected to the main torso, a complex, pulsing knot of softer-looking material. She saw the way the creature balanced on two slender legs, the potential points of weakness. She saw the smooth oval not as a head, but as a sensory cluster, likely fragile. In a flash of cold, ancient knowledge, her mind mapped a path. A shot to the central knot would cripple. A strike to the sensory cluster would blind and disorient. The thing was looking at the moss on a rock. It was not looking at them. It was exposed. A low sound, almost a growl, started deep in Sujin's throat. It was a sound of pure, instinctive assessment. The creature moved, not with a jerk, but a smooth, flowing motion. The oval sensory cluster rotated towards them. It saw Sujin. It saw her posture, her coiled stillness, the terrifying focus in her black dilated eyes. It saw a predator that had just finished its evaluation. The air around the creature warped violently, and it was gone. The clearing was just a clearing again, full of normal sunlight and the smell of damp earth. Ji-hun gasped, sagging as if a weight had been lifted. What was? Sujin finally blinked. She released his arm, leaving red marks on his skin. She looked at the empty space, then down at her own hands, turning them over. She wasn't seeing her hands. She was seeing the path her imaginary arrow would have taken. "Pray," she whispered, the word foreign and cold on her tongue. The quiet of Sujin's house was now a cage. Every rustle of leaves outside the window was a footstep. Every shift of the light was a shimmer about to form. Ji-hun had wanted to stay, his face pale with shock, but she had sent him home. He needed to process the impossible. She needed to think. Or, more accurately, she needed to let the new thing inside her think. It wouldn't stop. The image of the creature was burned onto the back of her eyes. But it wasn't the memory of fear. It was the memory of the assessment. Her fingers itched, not for a camera but for a pencil. She found a sketch pad, an old one from her archery days with diagrams of shot angles. She sat at her kitchen table and began to draw. Her hand moved with a speed and certainty that felt foreign. She didn't draw the being as a whole. She started with the joint, the complex, bulging knot where the main limbs connected to the core. She drew it from 3 angles. She shaded areas that felt softer, more vulnerable. She turned the page. She drew the sensory oval. She sketched the way it was attached, a slender stalk. A weak point. She drew lines of force, imagining impact. Her breath was even, calm. This was a study, a target analysis. Ji-hun called 3 times that night. She let it go to voicemail. His voice was worried, full of questions about aliens and governments. He was thinking about what the thing was. Sujin was only thinking about what it did, how it moved, how it balanced, where it was weak. Sleep was impossible. Instead, she researched. She typed in simple, stark terms: persistence hunting, human predatory instincts, eye dilation in hunters. She fell into articles about how humans were unique. Other predators used speed or strength. Humans used patience. They used focus. They would follow a single animal for days, never rushing, just waiting for the perfect moment of exhaustion, of inattention. They would stare at their prey with an unblinking intensity that could somehow be felt. Primal warning. A cold understanding settled in her stomach. The shimmer in the clearing wasn't magic. It was a technology, a cloak. The creature was observing like a scientist behind one-way glass. Thought it was safe. Thought it was the watcher. It never considered that something might be watching back. And not just watching, tracking. The next morning, she went back to the forest. Not with her camera, but with her sketchpad. She stood at the edge of the clearing. The sun was in the same place. Everything was normal. Then the feeling returned. The pressure. The sense of a vast, silent attention sweeping over the area. It was fainter this time, more like a searchlight scanning from a great height. It passed over the trees, the rocks, the stream, and it passed over her. As it touched her, her body reacted without her permission. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate, which had jumped initially, steadied into a strong, slow rhythm. Her vision tunneled. The edges of the clearing blurred, but the center, the spot where the creature had stood, became hyperclear. She could see every blade of grass bent from where it had rested. Her hearing dimmed all sounds except the wind, which she could now trace as it moved through specific branches. This was not panic. This was preparation. Her body was getting ready to do something, to act. The ancient software was booting up, and it was asking for a target. The scanning sensation lingered on her. Felt different than before. Not just curious, hesitant, confused. It focused on her for 3, 4, 5 long seconds. She didn't move. She just looked up at the empty sky, right at the source of the pressure, and let it feel her focus. Let it feel the attention. The pressure vanished with a suddenness that was almost violent. The forest sounds rushed back. The sharpness left her eyes. She swayed, putting a hand on a tree for support. She was drenched in a cold sweat, exhausted as if she had run for miles. They knew she was here. They knew she was different. Back home, she pinned her sketches to the wall. They weren't art. They were diagrams. Blueprints of a living thing, marked with its failures. She looked at them and felt nothing. No fear of the alien. No wonder at its existence. Only a deep, simmering recognition. Jihan came over, unannounced. He saw the sketches on the wall and his face lost its color. Sujin, what is this? It's what I saw, she said, her voice quiet. It looks like a dissection guide. He took a step closer, horrified. This isn't right. You should be terrified. We should call someone. Who? She asked, turning to him. Her eyes were calm, which scared him more than if she had been crying. Who do we call to report that the animals in the zoo are looking back? And that they are looking at the locks on the cages? He had no answer. He just stared at her, at the clinical drawings, at the woman who was his friend but who now seemed to be standing behind a sheet of cold glass. The thing in the forest had been alien. But this change in Sujin, this was a different kind of strangeness. It was a human strangeness, and that made it worse. That night, the scanning came again. Stronger. Closer. It passed over her house like a slow tide. Sujin sat in the dark, her back against the wall, and watched the window. Her pupils widened, drinking in the faint moonlight. She didn't try to fight the feeling anymore. She let it rise. The hunter was awake, and it was waiting to see if the prey would be foolish enough to come back. The forest had become a silent stage. Jihan tried to get Sujin to leave, to come to the city with him. She refused. She said she needed to be where the air was clear. He didn't understand she meant she needed to see them coming. He started coming every day, bringing food, trying to pull her back with stories and jokes. She listened, but her eyes were always on the trees. The observers were also trying to understand. They were catalogers, not warriors. Their purpose was to study life from a place of perfect safety, hidden behind their phase-shift cloaks. The human species was chaotic and loud, oblivious to their presence. All except one. This single, quiet human female registered on their sensors not as a biological curiosity, but as an anomaly. Her physiological readings during a scan were all wrong. They showed the calm, focused metrics of a predator in waiting, not the scattered fear response of prey. They decided on a closer, static observation. A risk, but knowledge required data. They chose the clearing. It was a place of study. A complex spider's web had formed between two ferns, and the morning dew made it a jeweled lattice. One of them phased into solidity, its multi-jointed limbs folding gracefully beneath it as it stooped to examine the web's structure. To it, this was a moment of beauty and study. It was not thinking of danger. It had never needed to. Sujin knew they were there before she saw them. The pressure was a constant hum in the air now, a vibration felt in the teeth. She had been restless all morning, moving from window to window. Finally, she picked up her backpack. Ji-hun, who had just arrived, saw the look on her face. "Where are you going?" "For a walk," she said. Her voice had no room for argument. "I'll come with you." She didn't say yes or no. She just walked out the door. He followed, a knot of anxiety in his chest. The path to the clearing was too quiet. No birds sang. Sujin walked not like a hiker, but like a shadow. Her steps made no sound. Ji-hun, trying to keep up, felt like a clumsy bear crashing through the underbrush. She stopped at the tree line. She lifted a hand, and he froze behind her. There, in the center of the dappled light, it was. This time it was fully real. The shimmer was gone. The creature was solid, its crystalline body catching the sun in soft rainbows. It was bent over the spiderweb, one delicate limb extended, not touching, just admiring. Ji-hun's brain short-circuited. The difference between a shimmer and this solid reality was immense. This was intelligent. This was here. His breath caught in a choked gasp. Sujin made no sound. She took a single, slow step out from the trees. Ji-hun wanted to grab her, to yank her back. But the look on her face pinned him in place. It was not fear. It was calculation. Her eyes were fixed on the creature, and they were so wide, so dark, they looked like holes in the world. The creature was preoccupied. His back was partly turned. Its limbs were occupied with balance and study. Sujin's body moved into a posture Ji-hun had seen only in old videos of her competitions. Her weight settled evenly on her feet. Her shoulders squared. Her head went perfectly still. It was the stance of an archer at full draw, but her hands were empty. She was hunting. She took another step, then another. She was closing the distance, moving at an angle not directly towards it. She was cutting off the easiest path to the thicker woods. She was silent. A deep, low sound vibrated in her chest. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a large cat assessing a grazing animal. The observer froze. Its limb hovered over the dewdrop. Its sensory oval swiveled slowly away from the web. It saw her, processed the scene in an instant. The human was not running. It was not hiding. It was approaching with a terrible, deliberate silence. The human's posture was one of coiled potential. And the eyes, the black, dilated eyes, were fixed on the junction of its primary limbs. On the weak point, in that moment, a circuit closed in the observer's ancient mind. A circuit buried under eons of peaceful scholarship. It was the circuit that understood being seen by something that meant harm. It was the prey circuit. The observer did not attack. It did not raise a weapon. It recoiled. Its whole body flinched backward in a fluid, startled motion. And then it opened a channel it had not used in a million years. It shrieked. The sound was not loud in the normal way. It did not just travel through the air. It phased through everything, through flesh, through bone, through the earth itself. It was a frequency of pure, undiluted terror. It was the sound a creature makes when it suddenly, perfectly understands it is about to die. Ji-hun cried out, clapping his hands over his ears. The sound bypassed his hands. It vibrated in his skull, a spike of dizzying, mindless fear. He stumbled to his knees, disoriented. Sujin blinked. The shriek hit her like a physical wave. But the hunter's focus, already active, analyzed it. She heard the terror in it. She heard the panic. She did not feel fear in return. She felt a cold, clear confirmation. The thing was scared of her. She tilted her head, studying the creature as it frantically backed away, its limbs scrambling. It was no longer a mysterious alien. It was an animal that had given away its position. The observer phased. It didn't vanish slowly. It flickered out of existence in a frantic burst of distorted light, leaving the clearing empty. The spiderweb, untouched, glistened in the sudden silence. The awful sound stopped. Ji-hun was on the ground, panting, tears of shock and pain in his eyes. What was that?" he stammered. Sujin finally looked away from the empty space. She looked down at her hands, then at Ji-hun. Her pupils were still wide, but a faint awareness was returning to her face. The hunter was receding, leaving a woman standing in a quiet forest. "A warning," she said softly. She walked over and helped him up. His hands were trembling. Hers were steady as stone. It was warning the others. About me. The shriek was not just sound. It was data, a desperate, pulsed emission of complex biological information. It washed over the island and kept going, a ripple of pure fear traveling at speeds human science could not measure. It was also picked up by Park Min-seo's listening station. Her team had recalibrated their sensors to look for the ghosts. They found something else. The shriek was a short, brutal burst of energy across multiple spectra. It defied classification, but the emotional content was somehow clear, even to the machines. The algorithms, designed to find patterns in cosmic noise, flagged it with a single word: terror. Min-seo sat in a secure government office in Seoul, the data on a screen. Military officials and intelligence analysts sat with her. They were all confused. The source of the emission was pinpointed to Jeju Island. But what could cause such a signal? What was so afraid? "It's them," Min-seo said, her voice tired. "The atmospheric phenomena. Something scared one of them. Badly." An intelligence officer frowned. "Scared it? Our satellites show no weapons discharge. No explosions. Just this noise." "It's not a noise," Min-seo insisted. "It's a scream." On Jeju, Ji-hun was not doing well. The shriek had left a ringing in his ears and a deep, shaking fear in his bones. He sat in Sujin's kitchen, a blanket around his shoulders, holding a mug of tea he couldn't drink. He had described everything to officials who arrived swiftly and quietly. He told them about the solid creature, its beauty, its sudden panic. He told them about the sound. They asked about Sujin. He said she was calm. Too calm. Now, two serious-faced men and a woman in a neat suit were in the living room with Sujin. They had seen her sketches still pinned to the wall. They did not look at them like art. "Miss Lee," the woman said, "your friend described a terrifying alien encounter, yet your drawings are clinical, like diagrams." Sujin sat very still. "They are diagrams. I drew what I saw." "Why?" asked one of the men. "Why not call the police? Why not run?" Sujin looked at him. Her gaze was direct and unnerving. "It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at a spider web. It was not prepared to be seen. I was assessing the situation." The officials exchanged a glance. Her language was wrong. It was the language of a soldier or a hunter, not a witness. "Assessing it for what?" the woman pressed. "For what it was," Sujin said simply. They brought out a tablet. On it was a blurred, enhanced image taken from a satellite during the event. It showed the clearing. A smudge of light was the observer. A smaller, human-shaped blur stood at the tree line. "This is you," the man said, pointing to the blur. Sujin looked at the image. She nodded. "Can you walk us through your actions? From the moment you saw it." She did. She spoke in flat, simple sentences. I saw it in the clearing. I saw it was focused on the web. I stepped into the open. I observed its posture. I noted the point where its limbs joined its body. I noted the attachment of its sensory head. I approached at an angle to block the path to the dense trees. It noticed me. It became alarmed. It made the sound and left. The room was silent. The woman's pen had stopped moving on her notepad. You noted its weak points, the second man stated slowly. I noted its structure, Sujin corrected. But it was no correction at all. They played the audio of the shriek, cleaned of its worst psychic effects. It was still a horrible, grating sound of panic. Ji-hun flinched in the kitchen. Sujin listened, her head tilted. What does that sound like to you, Miss Lee? The woman asked, watching her closely. Sujin was quiet for a moment. It sounds like a rabbit, she said finally. When a hawk's shadow passes over it, it is a warning to other rabbits. And a last, desperate attempt to startle the hawk. The analogy hung in the air. The officials looked from Sujin, a slender woman in a simple sweater, to the brutal, anatomical sketches on her wall. The disconnect was chilling. They understood now. The global committee studying the ghosts was arguing over intentions, technology, diplomacy. But this woman in a forest clearing had reduced it to a primal equation. She had looked at a being from the stars and had not seen an ambassador or an invader. She had seen an animal that had made itself vulnerable. And something in her biology, something ancient and sleeping, had recognized it. Not as a threat, as prey. The lead official closed her notebook. Miss Lee, we need you to come with us. For your safety. And for further understanding. Sujin looked out the window at the forest. The pressure in the air was gone. The observers had retreated. But she knew they were still there, watching from much, much farther away. She had changed the game. All right, she said, standing up. She was not agreeing for her safety. She was agreeing because the hawk was now out of the trees, and everyone could see it. The facility was cold and quiet. They put Sujin in a comfortable room with a bed, a table, and a window that looked out at a concrete wall. They were polite. They brought her food and asked more questions. They showed her new images from telescopes and satellites. The observers were no longer hiding. They revealed themselves not with attacks, but with a silent, stunning display. Beautiful, crystalline ships the size of mountains hung in the high atmosphere over every major city on Earth. They did not move. They did not communicate. They simply existed, glowing with a soft inner light, like frozen chandeliers against the blue sky. The world held its breath, waiting for a message, a demand, a sign. In her room, Sujin watched the news. She saw the fear in reporters' eyes. She saw the chaos in the streets. She saw world leaders on screens, speaking of unity and caution, their faces pale. They were all looking up at the ships and wondering, what do they want? A young scientist, brought in to keep her company and observe her, nervously adjusted his glasses. It's incredible, isn't it? Their technology. They must be so advanced. Sujin didn't look away from the screen. They're scared, she said. The scientist blinked. What? How can you say that? They're hanging over our cities. We're the ones who are scared. They revealed themselves, Sujin said, her voice low. A predator that is confident does not show itself. It stays hidden until it strikes. They are showing their size, their numbers. It's a display, like a cat arching its back to look bigger. They are trying to understand what they saw in the forest. They are asking a question without words. The scientist stared at her, a chill going down his spine. He had read her file. Ji-hun was allowed to visit. He looked older. The reality of the ships, the global panic, had worn him down. Sujin, you have to talk to them. The people in charge. They're arguing in circles. They think it's about weapons or territory. It's not, she said. I know that, he said, his voice rising with frustration. You know that, but they don't. They keep analyzing the ship's composition, their energy signatures. They're not talking about the shriek. They're not talking about you. She turned from the window to look at him. What about me? He took a step closer, lowering his voice. They have the data from the clearing. Your biometrics from that day were recorded by a park camera system. Your heart rate dropped. Your pupils dilated. Your body showed the stress signature of a special forces sniper, not a terrified civilian. They think you're an anomaly, maybe even a threat. Sujin was silent for a long moment. She looked at her hands. They were steady. I am, she said simply. To them, I am. I am the thing that doesn't fit in their records. The quiet thing in the grass that watched back. The door to her room opened. Park Minacio stood there, looking tired but sharp. Behind her were the same officials from Jeju. Miss Lee, Minacio said. We have made contact. Sujin stood up. What did they say? Minacio's mouth was a thin line. One word. A translation that came through on every screen, every frequency simultaneously. One word. Repeated. Jihan held his breath. What was it? Minacio looked directly at Sujin. Predator. The room was utterly still. The official behind Minacio cleared his throat. They are not addressing our governments. They are not asking for our leaders. Their transmission is a request. A single, repeated query. Explain the predator. All eyes turned to Sujin. She stood very still in the center of the room. The meaning was clear. The ships overhead, the global terror, the end of human history as they knew it, it was not about armies or politics. It was about a look exchanged in a forest. It was about the one human who had looked at them and seen something to be hunted. They don't want to talk to a president, Jihan whispered, understanding dawning with horror. They want to talk to you. The lead official stepped forward. Miss Lee, we can craft a response. Our best diplomats, our psychologists, we can formulate a message to de-escalate. Sujin shook her head. It was a small, firm motion. No, she said. You will give them what they asked for. Give them the predator. You can't just go out there, Jihan exclaimed. Not me, Sujin said. She looked at the screen at the shimmering ship over Seoul. The idea of me. They need to see that the predator is not all of humanity. It is a part of us we had forgotten, and that it only wakes up when it is hunted. She turned to the officials. Her face was calm, but her eyes held that old, deep focus. Set up a broadcast. From here. From the city. Let me look at it. And let it look at me. It was a gamble. It could be the act that started a war. Or it could be the only thing that would end one. The officials argued in hushed, frantic tones. Minacio watched Sujin, the woman who saw gravity ripples and thought of weak points. Finally, the lead official nodded, his face grim. We will prepare the link. You will have one chance to speak. Choose your words very, very carefully. Sujin walked to the window, though she could only see concrete. Somewhere above, the ship was waiting. She wasn't thinking about words. She was thinking about the clearing, about silence, about the power of a stare that could make the universe itself flinch and shriek. They took her to the roof of the tall facility. The night air was cold and sharp. Seoul stretched out below, a sea of frightened lights under a strange, new moon. The observer ship hung directly above. It was not metal. It looked like frozen smoke and crystal, glowing from within with a soft blue light. It was silent and terribly beautiful. Cameras were set up, pointing at her. A small microphone was pinned to her shirt. Officials and technicians huddled behind a shielded barrier, their faces tense. Jihan was there, held back by a guard. His eyes were wide with fear. For her. For everything. Sujin walked to the center of the roof. She felt small. The ship was a mountain in the sky. The pressure she had felt in the forest was back, multiplied 1,000 times. It was the focused attention of an entire species. It was a question made of gravity and light. The broadcast light on the camera glowed red. Live. To the world. To them. She did not look at the camera. She looked up. She tilted her head back and let her gaze find the heart of the shimmering ship. She did not speak immediately. She let the silence stretch. She let them look at her, a lone human woman on a rooftop, looking back. On screens across the planet, people saw her stillness. They saw her face, calm and pale in the alien glow. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear. It did not boom. It was quiet, but it carried. "You came to watch," she said. She paused, letting the simple words hang in the air. "You are good watchers. You are quiet. You are patient. You stay in the shadows. You think this makes you safe." She took a slow breath. Her body was remembering the forest, the focus. Her vision began to narrow, tunneling on the ship's core. Her heartbeat was a slow, steady drum in her ears. "But you forgot something," she continued. "To watch is not just to see. It is to understand what you are seeing. You saw a noisy world. You saw creatures who fight each other, who are loud, who never look up. You thought you were the only ones who knew how to watch." Below, Jihan held his breath. Park Min-seo leaned forward, her scientist's mind frantically analyzing the translation feed. "But some of us," Sujin said, and her voice changed. It became softer, colder. "Some of us are quiet too. Some of us know how to be still. We learned it a long time ago, when we followed the deer for days under a hot sun. We learned to watch its legs to see when it was tired. We learned to watch its head to see when it was drinking and would not hear us. We learned that to watch is the first step to the hunt." On the ship, the observers listened. They saw her physiological data streaming from the rooftop sensors. Her calm, her focus, the terrifying, predatory readiness in her stillness. "You stood in the clearing," she said, and now she was not talking to the world. She was talking directly to the memory of the one who had shrieked. "You looked at a spider's web. You were beautiful, and you were not looking at me. You were prey that did not know it was being hunted." She let the word prey sit there. A gasp seemed to ripple through the officials behind her. "So now you are scared," she stated, as if it were a simple fact. "You show us your big ships. You ask for an explanation. Here it is." She raised her hands, not in surrender, but showing them empty. "The predator you saw is not all of us. It is a part of us we put away. We built cities. We forgot the old silence. We forgot the long stare. You did not come as hunters. You came as tourists, and you woke the old part up." She lowered her hands. She took one step closer to the edge of the roof, her eyes never leaving the ship. "You have a choice now. You can see us as prey, and the predator in us will wake up for a fight. Or you can see us for what we are. A species that can build and create and wonder at the stars. A species that also contains, deep inside, the quiet thing that followed the deer. The thing that knows how to wait. The thing that knows how to watch." She stopped. The only sound was the wind whistling over the rooftop. Then, she did the most important thing. She deliberately, slowly, closed her eyes. She broke the hunter's stare. She held them closed for 3 full seconds. When she opened them, the fierce focus was gone. She was just a tired woman, looking up at a strange, beautiful light in the sky. "We can all go back to watching the spider's web," she said. Her voice now just a whisper the microphone barely caught. "But you must look with respect, not from the shadows." For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship hung in the sky, silent and immense. Then, its inner light pulsed. It was not the panicked flash of the shriek. It was a slow, deep wave of blue that rolled from its core to its edges. A single, peaceful pulse. Across Seoul, across the world, the other ships began to pulse in gentle, rippling sequence. A wave of soft blue light passed over the planet. On the rooftop, the immense ship above them began to move. It did not dart away. It retreated, slowly and gracefully, rising up and up, getting smaller, its light fading. One by one, across the globe, the lights in the sky winked out, fading into the darkness of space. The pressure vanished. The night was just the night again. Sujin's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cold rooftop. The strength, the cold focus, drained from her all at once, leaving her shaking and empty. Jihan broke free and ran to her, wrapping the blanket from his own shoulders around her. She leaned into him, her whole body trembling. On the street below, a confused, Then hopeful cheer began to rise. They thought it was a victory of words, of diplomacy. Ji-hun held his friend, feeling her small, human shivers. He looked up at the now empty sky. He knew the truth. No words had saved them. A reminder had. A display of an old, dark truth, followed by a choice not to use it. The predators had looked at each other, and the wiser ones had decided to just walk away.